Hi there, students. Tonight, we're going to begin our introduction to the field of ecology. Ecology is the study of the interactions among organisms and between organisms and their environments. You may remember from our previous unit that the level of organization in the hierarchy of life that includes communities of organisms interacting with their environments is the level of ecosystem. Therefore, it would be appropriate to think about ecology as the study of ecosystems. Let's begin our study of ecology by emphasizing that, unlike the biosphere as a whole, individual organisms are not closed systems. In other words, throughout their lifetimes, organisms must constantly obtain new matter and energy from their environment. The matter that an organism gets from its environment is used for its growth and development, while the energy an organism gets from its environment is used to fuel all of the cellular functions that go on inside the organism. Because of these matter and energy requirements, an organism is dependent on and connected to its environment for its very survival. And as such, a closer look at how organisms interact with their environments is justified for this course. In this lecture, we will look at the living, or biotic, as well as the non-living, or abiotic factors that make up an organism's environment. Let's begin with the abiotic factors that, in various combination, create the wide variety of habitats that organisms can occupy on Earth. The first abiotic factor is the amount of sunlight that is available to the habitat. Since sunlight is the fundamental source of energy, the amount of sunlight has a direct effect on the number of producer organisms, like plants, that a habitat can support. The greater the diversity of producers a habitat can support, the greater the diversity of consumers it can support. Next, water availability is an important characteristic of every habitat. Water is essential to all life on Earth, so the amount of water available in a habitat helps determine what types of organisms can occupy that habitat. The next important abiotic characteristic is temperature. Because most living things can survive only within a narrow range of temperatures, the temperature of a habitat dictates which organisms can live there and which organisms must make their homes elsewhere. The next abiotic factor in a habitat is the soil. Soil comes in many different varieties, with different compositions, nutrient contents, and degrees of fertility. Just as we discussed with sunlight, the type of soil present in an environment determines the diversity of producers or plants that habitat can support, which in turn determines the diversity of consumers that the habitat can support. The final two abiotic factors are wind and frequency of severe disturbances, such as wildfire, hurricanes, droughts, etc. These factors affect the way resources are circulated in a habitat, as well as the resiliency of the populations as they adapt to accommodate these disruptions. Now that we've identified some important abiotic factors, let's discuss how these factors create and shape various habitats. We'll begin by defining the term habitat as specific physical environments in which organisms live. So, for example, if you investigate a wilderness area, you'll find within that area several habitats, or places that organisms can live. Everything from patches of forest, to marshy areas, to lakes or rivers within the area, and so on. What makes each habitat distinct is its combination of biotic and abiotic factors. So, for example, a forest habitat is characterized by the presence of trees, rich soils, varying light, and moderate temperatures. If you change these factors, say by making the dominant producers algae and water mosses instead of trees, by maybe diminishing the amount of direct light, by dropping the average temperature, and now you've got a different habitat, an Arctic habitat, like the one you see in the center occupied by the polar bears. Change the biotic and abiotic factors again, perhaps add more water and humidity, more sunlight and warmer temperatures, silt soils, tough water grasses, and you have another distinct habitat, a swamp, like the one showed in the bottom right. All right, now that we've identified how the habitats that exist in an ecosystem are distinguished by their specific combination of biotic and abiotic factors, let's now talk about how individual organisms fit into their ecosystems. The specific role of a species within its ecosystem is called its niche, or sometimes pronounced niche. Either pronunciation will do for this class. To understand this concept, it helps me to use a metaphor of a play or a theatrical production. In a play, you have lead actors, supporting actors, the director, the sound and lights crew, the costume designers, etc. Everyone has a role, and you can't really overlap the roles of, say, the sound manager and the director. They each have their own part that they must play to make the theatrical production go on successfully. So, in an ecosystem, you can think of a particular species niche as that part that it plays in the grand production of daily life in that ecosystem. Some aspects of a species niche include the food it eats, when its food is obtained, and its specific habitat. Now, just like in our metaphor with our actors, directors, and stage crew, for species to coexist in a habitat, each species must have its own niche within that habitat. So, for example, the niche occupied by the Cape May warbler, shown in the picture in the top right, might be treetop dweller that feeds on insects during the daytime. In order for the bay-breasted warbler, shown in the middle, to coexist with the Cape May warbler, it must carve out its own niche, which it accomplishes by hunting insects in the middle areas of the trees instead of at the tree tops in the Cape May warbler's niche. Another organism that hunts insects from trees, say such as a bat, can coexist with the warblers only by occupying a slightly altered niche. For example, hunting the insects at night instead of during the day. These examples are illustrations of the competitive exclusion principle, which is also known as Gauss's law. It states that two organisms cannot occupy the same niche and remain at constant population values. This is because if two species try to occupy the same niche, and one species has even the slightest advantage over another, it will eventually overcome the other species in the long term. This leads to either the extinction of one species or an evolutionary shift in that species towards a different ecological niche. Oops. Sorry, kiddos. This, I don't know how that happened, but this term here, oops, belongs in this blank. All right, sorry about that. Okay, that's all for tonight. Please bring your completed notes to class tomorrow, and have a great night.